Welcome, everyone. I am so thrilled to bring you today one of my dearest mentors. She stands in my consciousness as such a wise elder and teacher. I have been reading her books of poetry since I was 16 years old.
Oh.
And Carol Lynn Pearson, you've just been such an inspiration to me and so shaped the way I understand birth and death. And honestly, Carolyn, I believe that you were the first woman's voice, a clear stand for the female experience that growing up Mormon, I had ever heard. And I really want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for your thanks, Melody. You know, I think all of us just kind of respond to the voices that are inside of us. Sometimes the anger that's inside of us, the confusion that's inside of us, and as we try to work it out for ourselves, sometimes if we sort of have a calling to do a little bit more than that, we take all that personal struggle and say, I think somebody else might be feeling the same stuff. Maybe I could help somebody because I've been thinking about this for so long. So that's sort of how that happened for me, and that has gone on for a long time now. And I am really so grateful that so many people such as you have found a resonance in the things that I have been thinking about and writing about and putting out there, because clearly they're important to me. And it's wonderful to know that they're important to so many people as well. And indeed, this is the time when women are claiming our own in so many ways. Yes. So I'm glad to be with you on this journey.
And truly, you have prepared not just me, but so many women. I grew up in the Mormon church, and
as did I.
As did you, and you are still miraculously a member of the Mormon church, activating. You are a powerful voice for change from within. 20 years ago, Spirit called me to emancipate myself, to leave the organization. I simply took Gandhi's advice to be the change that I had so wanted to see and was so trying to make happen in the Mormon church. And so life has taken me on a very expansive spiritual journey since then. And I can see from your writing that you have been on that expansive spiritual journey.
Indeed.
In spite of the fact that you are still somehow belonging to this very patriarchal system.
It's kind of a modern day Mormon miracle, isn't it?
It is. It's a complete miracle. And, you know, I wonder if you would have been able to maintain your membership if you lived in Utah, where you and Gerald lived.
That's a question. That is a question. I do live in California, for those who don't know, and I have been, well, I was about to say protected, and I have been protected by my local leaders here. But I have been blessed to have leadership, and when we say that, we mean male leadership, of course.
Of course.
Leadership who not only tolerates me, but truly appreciates me and uses me for what I can do. Some few years ago, when California went through the horrendous Proposition 8 thing,
right,
I worked very closely with my state presidency, who were heartbroken over what they were seeing.
Right.
And then those three gentlemen and I are still a little group that talks to each other all the time online. And my bishops have all been very generous to me. And, you know, just actually my ward just loves me, which is wonderful. And I'm not giving that up.
Yeah.
And I'm going to continue to do the things that I'm called to do.
Carol Lynn, for the listeners who don't know you and don't know your work yet, your books of poems came out started coming out in the 60s. And you were the first real popular Mormon woman poet. And you have been on the leading edge of really exposing some of the shadow, some of the challenge of patriarchy. So would you take us through a little bit of your story of how that first book, I think it was Beginning.
Oh, sure.
Wasn't it?
Yes, it was indeed. And it is a remarkable story. I will tell it. And of course, bringing in my husband, I'll bring a little bit of that interesting aspect as well. But when I married in 1966, and after we finished with the book, I will tell you more about that marriage, because that's the way I got to be a writer in the first place. But I married a very dear, queer, gay man. And of course, we were very naive. And we understood from our church teaching that you just, if you get off on the wrong track, you repent, you do the right thing, you find a woman that loves you. And my dear husband, Gerald, before we married, told me we had to talk about something. He had been fasting for several days. And he told me that he had, in his past, had some feelings in that and some experience in that, but that's not who he was. He loved me, and I know that he loved me the very best he possibly could. And and he assured me that that's not who he was. He wanted to do everything right. He was 100% devoted to the church. He had served a mission to Australia. So anyway, we married in the Salt Lake Temple in 1966. And we had, in so many ways, even physically, we appeared to be compatible. We had a very good marriage. Actually, our marriage was envied by a lot of our friends. But right off the bat, Gerald learned that what he'd hoped for had not happened, that his feelings had not changed. But that's moving along a little bit too far from where we want to be right now. As soon as we got married, Gerald said, "We're going to publish your book, a book of your poems." He had read my little short spiritual poems, and he was just crazy about them. And I had thought, well, I'll publish these posthumously, but he was determined. So he put me in the car, and we went to Salt Lake to visit Bookcraft, which was the only really available book publisher. And the man sat with us, and who owned the company, and said, "Poetry? I could not possibly publish poetry. Nobody would buy it." We showed him these beautiful illustrations that our friend Trevor Southey had created. Oh, they looked so depressing, he said. So I said, "Well, could you just take it home and let your wife read it?" No, no, can't even keep it no, can't keep it. So we got in the car and we left, and Gerald said, "You know what? We can just become a publisher. Anybody can be a publisher. You just have to have the money to do it." So I was working at that time in the script writing department of BYU Motion Pictures. And so we took $2,000, published 2,000 copies of this little book called Beginnings, and put them in my father's garage and under our bed. And I thought, boy, we've got a lifetime of wedding presents here. And Gerald took a box up to the BYU bookstore, and the woman said, "Oh, no, we can't sell poetry here. But since your wife is a local person, that might have a little interest, so you can leave 4 on consignment." So he said, "Well, can I just leave this box of 20 on consignment?" Okay. So it was later that day, and I doubted that. So I checked my diary, and it was later that day that she called and said, "Do you have any more of those little books of poetry called Beginnings?" So that's the start of it. And BYU Bookstore could not keep it off. Yeah, there it is.
There it is. So
Day Old Child.
this was my favorite poem from that book. It's called Day Old Child. Here's Trevor's illustration. And Carol Lynn, I want you to know that for each one of my births, I've had 5 children. I used this image as my focal point and your words as my inspiration.
Well, let me just read that little poem so people will know what we're talking about here. It's very, very short. My day old child lay in my arms. With my lips against his ear, I whispered strongly, how I wish that you could hear. I've 100 wonderful things to say, a tiny cough and a nod. Hurry, hurry, hurry and grow so I can tell you about God. My day old baby's mouth was still and my words only tickled his ear. But a kind of a light passed through his eyes and I saw this thought appear. How I wish I had a voice and words. I've 100 things to say. Before I forget, I'd tell you of God. I left him yesterday. So that little verse turned out to be, I think, the most popular verse in this little volume. So that's what started me on a career of writing. And it's remarkable. It was a fluke. It was maybe my fate. But this really put me on the map, especially in our Mormon community, and opened the door to everything else that I did.
Yeah. So one of the experiences that I had growing up, I think I was 14 maybe when my dad, for my birthday, gave me this book, and reading this woman's perspective over the years helped me to grow into my own perspective. And it helped to center birth and death for me. And you've written many poems about both. And there were other teachings. I was doing an interview a few weeks ago, and I referenced a book that I had read by Paul Dunn and Ricky Iyer called This Birth We Call Death. So there were other teachings that I was exposed to at an early age that equated these two sort of bookends of mortality. Birth is a gateway, death is a gateway. And you were the first voice that helped me to bring those two together in a way of centering the woman's experience. And I'm just wondering, so you started writing as a very young woman, before you even had children. You've had, I believe it's 4 children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you and I have both gone through the horribly painful grief and tragedy of losing a child. And now you're 80 this year.
You told.
I told. Yes.
I thought I could pass for 79.
You I'm sure you could. You could probably pass for 70, and you wear that like a crown.
Oh.
So let's one of the things I want to do for my community is to expose us to women who are a little further up the path and doing it well. So if you would just speak to us about your own experience of birth and death, and what are the similarities for you? What are the touching points in those two experiences?
Well, because we are going to speak about death, let me just spend a minute biographically bringing us through the interesting story of my husband. So we we determined to maintain our marriage. We loved each other, and we had 4 children, and then finally everything was out on the table, and we both understood that Gerald could not forever continue to live the life of a heterosexual man. And people who don't understand the power and the complexity of sexual orientation won't understand that. And I didn't understand that. I thought, come on, you started this family, just stay with it. But for Gerald, his sexual orientation was profound and reflected in every cell of his body. It is not just a sexual thing. So anyway, to shorten this, we spent 2 years agonizing in Provo, Utah, and then I by that time I was a public figure, and I felt that it was possible, maybe likely, that we were going to have to end the marriage, and I did not want to do that in front of all these people whose only understanding would be to hate him, to judge him, to not understand the complexity of all this at all. I didn't want that. So anyway, we had to move for a number of reasons, and it was I who said, let's just move to California. He had lived in Walnut Creek here with some people that he had worked with in the mission field in Australia. And so we moved here and rented, and after 2 years of anguish here, we made a determination to divorce, which we did in '78. And we remained good friends. And he came out to still be a member of the family on the weekends. And so then we moved into this other difficult position of how do we manage all of this. And then I remember once Gerald said to me, Blossom, if I could just find a man like you, I'd be in 7th heaven.
And he called you Blossom.
That's the only thing he called me. Yeah.
And did he ever find that partner?
No.
Yeah.
No. So it was 7 years after we divorced and maintained a strong friendship that Gerald passed away from AIDS. And I was helping him through the experience, and he was ultimately he was in my home here in Walnut Creek, this home that I speak to you from downstairs, when he passed away. And he and I had never discussed that I would write our story. Never. It was just too shameful. But Gerald said to me often, Blossom, you are called in this world to do something more than write little poems. And then I know that you and I came together to do a project. And I am so sorry it is so hard for you. But I know that we came together to do a project. And this is it. But still, there was no conversation about writing our story. And a bit after his death, it occurred to me, what if I could? What if I could write this? Because Gerald and I had both learned an awful lot through our experiences. And I knew that all over the country, there were young men, and especially in San Francisco, near to us, young men dying on the sidewalk, having been thrown out of their families, thrown out of their churches. And that was just unthinkable to me. So anyway, I thought about it for a short while, and then I thought, I need to do this. I need to. And everything just fell into place. I found an agent who was very enthusiastic, and this agent sold the story just the few pages of the story to Random House in New York, and well, the death was in '84, and then in '86 the book was published.
And the book is?
The book is called Goodbye, I Love You. Yeah. And it was really the first thing in my own community, the Mormon community, that opened the conversation about this subject.
In such a tender way.
Kind of way.
Yes.
Yeah. And Random House sent me on a 8-city tour, and I was on Good Morning America, and I was on Oprah, and all of the big city morning shows, and it was kind of a big deal then. So that also contributed to the trajectory of my writing plans and future, and mostly I still get emails from people telling me that book way back there in the '80s saved their lives. And I thought I was through with that subject, but we haven't solved that subject, have we?
We have not. And we have not. And Carol Lynn, I would like you to talk about the No More Goodbyes book, because that is the book that has changed the trajectory of my family.
Yeah. Well, it occurred to me in about 2006 or 8 or something that we had not solved the problem. And I'm thinking specifically of our Mormon community, but certainly way bigger than that.
Way bigger.
But I wrote this book specifically about LDS people, and called No More Goodbyes. Looking at the terrible ways we continue to disserve,
to persecute and shun.
Yeah. The ill-fated marriages, the family alienations, and the suicides.
Yes, yes. So what we've got in the Mormon Church is an othering, and not just the Mormon Church, but all traditional churches that hold that sexuality is a sin. We have this othering, this shunning, this alienation of all LGBTQ people. And this is a devastating experience. And your book, No More Goodbyes, Circling the Wagons Around Our Gay Mormon Loved Ones, really brought this out in front. And this book was published at the time that my daughter, my youngest daughter, had discovered that she herself is gay. Mm-hmm. And it came out just right before my sisters and I had been planning for years. We had been getting together as sisters, but we had been planning a sisters, daughters, granddaughters reunion. And I was concerned about how my sisters were going to react when they realize, and Samantha is very bold. She's very out there. She's not one to hide her light under a bushel or hide her identity under a bushel. And so I bought enough copies of the book No More Goodbyes to send to each of my sisters. And I said, if you would like both of us to come to the reunion, I need you to read this book and to share these ideas with your daughters so that my daughter will feel completely accepted. And I am so blessed that they did.
Wow.
And that she was welcomed into the sisterhood of our family, and there was no othering, there was no shunning. And so that book has really changed the trajectory of things for my own family.
Yeah. It's such a great opportunity to be able to facilitate that for me. You know, that just brings me to tears. And I receive comments like that so often. There's nothing a writer, I mean, people, there's tons of writers who are much more brilliant than I am, but my work is useful. And I would rather have my books be useful than be admired. So I'm just thrilled whenever I hear that.
And so before we move on to birth and death, let me just say that when I was in your home last, goodness, about 6 or 7 years ago, I think, you shared with me a manuscript that you were just concerned, no publisher had accepted it. And it's called The Hero's Journey of the Gay and Lesbian Mormon Youth. And it's a little pocket guide.
Yeah.
And I just wept when you shared it with me, and I said, oh, Carol Lynn, please, this is going to be so meaningful to so many. And I know you haven't made any money. It cost you to put this book together and publish it. But I just want to acknowledge that you took the concept of the hero's journey and you've so beautifully laid it out for these young people who so often meet with being shunned or being othered. And this beautiful book, it's right over here in my stack of books that I use when I facilitate my priestess process. And it gives these young people a way to hold what their communities are doing and reacting in a way that makes them stronger and makes them forgiving. I don't know how you manage that. It is really a work of spiritual brilliance.
I loved doing that. And of course, I've known about Joseph Campbell and his hero journey that so many movies are patterned upon, and it's a very successful journey. But always, the other part of my brain is always thinking about these dear, often confused, often maligned gay and lesbian people that I am so committed to. And it occurred to me, what would it be like if I could give them a trajectory for their life that is not a dismal one, right. Not one that just you make a mistake and this is Satan leading you down to hell.
Yes.
What if it could be a path of dignity, a path of nobility, a path of
service,
of not only finding something splendid, but being called to share it. Yes. And all of those elements were in Joseph Campbell's history. Yes. So I simplified down his history and chose little nuggets from his words. And then it was easy to put this together. And it's actually done without insulting the Mormon tribe.
Yes. And that's what's just so brilliant about it. It's done with such deep love and respect for people on all sides of this, all viewpoints, all perspectives, expansive ones and contracted ones. It's so brilliantly done. And I have to thank you because I belong in a particular beautiful priestess lineage. And in 2013, when I received the Magdalene High Priestess training, it just blew me away. It was by far and away the most empowering experience, and my heart longed to become a facilitator. And so I spent the next 2 years doing the training, and I became the first facilitator in this lineage to facilitate a trans woman in my circle last year. And it was such a beautiful, empowering experience. And so much of the medicine that I was able to transmit, not just to her, it wasn't just empowering to her, but to every woman in the circle. Mm-hmm. And so much of the medicine that I was able to transmit came through what I've learned in these books. So I want to thank you so much for that, and to suggest to our listeners and to those who are watching that if they are dealing with a family member who's having a hard time holding a big enough space for an LGBTQ family member or friend, your books on this subject would be a great place to start, to hold a more expansive, Christ-like, loving perspective.
I think so. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you didn't start out all those years ago with your beautiful poems that spoke so clearly to a woman's experience. You didn't start out to be an activist, and yet life has pushed you in that direction.
Life does that to us.
Yes, life does.
Yeah, actually, I was always born into issues, but I was born into women's issues.
Yes. Yes.
Pre-teen, I was looking around and saying, what is this? How come everything important is being done by men?
Yes.
How come, look up on the stand at church, all men. Listen to the radio, all men. Talk about God, a man. Why is it that I'm just as smart as any boy in my class? I'm as good. I do all the rules. I'm smart, but I'm not as good because somehow I just knew I was a second-class citizen. That females in earth and on earth and in heaven were second-class citizens. That's
in the one down position. Yeah. And so I would love to explore because you are a voice not for matriarchy as much as for partnership.
Sure.
And what year was it that Mother Wove the Morning came out? That came out in 91. 91. Okay. So it was right around that time that I got a phone call from a friend, and she said, oh my goodness, Carol Lynn Pearson has come out with a video. It's about the divine feminine. We've got to read this and see this. And I ordered it for myself, and it just blew me away, Carol Lynn. It just blew me away. And I started checking out the books out of the library that you had referenced in the back of that book. So it's a video of a one-woman play that I've really enjoyed sharing with my women's groups over the years. It's a one-woman play in which you enact 14 women through the ages of time, from prehistoric to modern day. And you enact these women, and you started as an actress. You were an actress before you were a writer, so it's so beautifully done. And we get to see the sort of devolution of behaviors and thoughts and beliefs as mankind moves into patriarchy. And then we get to see, as women in the one down position go through, these experiences of suffering, as do their men, we get to see toward the end this experience of moving into a place of being equal partners, being beloveds, being questmates on the path. And that truly reframed everything inside my consciousness.
I am so glad. Of course, that's what I hoped. That's what I wanted as I was spending all that delicious time working on each costume for each woman, and the simple props and everything for there. And I as I traveled, I put on that play over 300 times.
Oh my goodness.
And every time there was such overwhelming response from the women and the men.
Yes.
And I know that had a tremendous impact. And that the book and the DVD now are still available from my website, just my name.com, CarolLynnPearson.com. All of
Yes,
my things are available there.
I will post links to all of these because I feel like this work is so important. It's important for each of us to recognize. In my priestess process, we do this one shadow work initiation where we explore with really wonderful tools to find the inner patriarch inside of us and the inner matriarch that supports and upholds this one up, one down system that keeps that keeps logic over intuition, that keeps the masculine qualities over the feminine. And so that we can dismantle that in our own consciousness so that the parts of us can come together and work together rather than battling inside of us. It's so vital. Oh my goodness, it's so vital. So, so I appreciate you being willing to explore these ideas that were, that you were working with inside your heart and life, and make them available in the collective because the ripple effects are still going out.
Speaking of my early devotion to women's work, particularly focusing on the gender of God. And I believe that as the next paradigm shift, we're grateful for Galileo's paradigm shift about the earth and the sun and getting that worked out. But there's another paradigm shift that has to happen that assures us that the woman does not revolve around the man.
Right.
And that's sort of what we have lived with for centuries. And we live with that still now.
Yes.
So my most recent work, as I've gone back to the concept of God the Mother. And there's a book coming out just the middle of August called Finding Mother God. And just because I can, and just because your theme is birth and death, and just because I have brought up this subject of Mother God, I'm going to read one poem from that book. I could read all of these poems, and in one way or another they would be pertinent, but we've got too much to do. But I would like to share with you a poem called The Push and the Pull of Birthing. That tunnel they speak of, those who know a taste of death and come back to tell the bliss of the magnetic rushing pull through dark toward bright beyond words. Is it also a cosmic birth canal? A tunnel of two-way traffic? Is it the largeness of the smallness of the passage that the mother of my flesh groaned me through, pushed me through out of her dark womb into this sunlit world? And when the 9 months times 90 or more of my breathing in and out are done according to plan, when I am the one who mothers myself through the hard work, the labor pain of dying, will I then be delivered through the death into birth canal that pulls me into the reaching arms of my original mother, she who conceived the thought of me and now receives the abundance of me, planted a while in earth, she who will joyfully watch and tend and feed my eternal becoming.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
Thank you. So yes, we come and we go, and maybe we travel the same space.
That is stunningly expressed. So, are you familiar, Carol Lynn, with the image, the icon of the Sheela-na-gig? So this poem that Carol Lynn has just read is a beautiful verbal description of this symbol, the Sheila Negig. And the Sheila Negigs are all over the lands of my ancestors. They are depicted in churches, in cemeteries, in castles. And this symbol represents the birthing. This is a naked woman. And usually they're depicted, you can see they're very, very old women. And they are in the birthing position. And it is said that in ancient times, people had such reverence and such acknowledgement that we come into the life through the feminine, and we leave through a similar birth canal that takes us into the divine feminine. Yeah. So there's, whole books obviously written about this.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I'm sure these ideas are everywhere.
They're mythic.
All of the things that we're discovering are everywhere, but they have been tamped down. The men of the church, and I'm speaking here of the men of the Christian church, the Catholic church,
right,
who were so determined to keep the power, keep things pure the way they thought were pure. Women never had a chance to be, after Jesus, and Jesus was remarkably egalitarian.
Absolutely.
The way he spoke of women. And I have a poem I love in here about that. Of Jesus' mother telling him to pay special attention to those who look like me when you go down for your ministry. And he does.
He does. Yes. And so what then you see, and if you study history, it's easily available if someone's looking. When you study history, the history of the Catholic Church is the history of decimation of the feminine. For 1,000 years, there was the Dark Age, during the Inquisition, more women were put to death for being herbalists and midwives and witches than we lost in the Holocaust. And so, we, the people who are alive on our planet today, especially the white people who are alive on our planet today, are the frightened lineage, are the lineage of the frightened women who were left, who had to mute themselves and not assert their own power. So, I feel like the importance of your work cannot be understated in helping women to find their voice and find their power. The Dalai Lama made a beautiful prophecy years ago that the world will be, I don't love the word saved, but he used it.
He did.
Saved by I believe, the empowered woman, the empowered Western woman, who's had a little bit more privilege and a little bit more time to study these kinds of things and to integrate her own divine masculine and divine feminine powers.
Right, and I wrote a poem about that.
Oh, I want to hear all of these. I'm going to have to buy your book.
Forward to.
Yes, something for me to look forward to. So you've got this, thank you for sharing that poem about birth and death. And what I want to share with our communities is that my mother died in my arms when I was 35. It was 1990, and that was my initiation into what I now call the death mysteries. And as she was dying, well, let me just back up and say that before she passed, I became aware of beliefs and thoughts that were creating sort of a wall of fear. So when I would walk into her room to caregive, I lived 6 hours away. When I would come and I would see the changes in her body and see the cancer ravaging her body, I would contract, and there would be these beliefs that literally created this sort of barrier. And I had to really deliberately work with those beliefs and take down that barrier of fear so that I could put all of my attention on her. And I'm so grateful for the work I did that allowed me to, she died in my arms. I was holding her as she died. And I not only saw and felt the pulse fade and the breath stop, but I saw and felt her life force, her consciousness go into what I would learn 10 years later in my yoga teacher training is called the Sushumna. It's the central nerve channel of the spine. It's this dark tunnel. And I saw and felt her experiencing a life review. And although to us in the room, it was only minutes, time had altered for her. And she was taking all the time she needed. And when she emerged into the light, as her consciousness exited the body at the crown, she was greeted by her father, by her friends, by her departed loved ones. She was welcomed in to the community of the ancestors. And we were all lying or kneeling around the bed, holding on to her, crying. And she looked down at us. And one at a time, she opened her heart and sent a stream of love to each of us around her body. And as it penetrated us, our tears stopped midair and we looked at each other and we were like, do you feel her joy? It was a stunning experience. All of my siblings, or all of my sisters and my dad who were in the room with me, felt her joy. And then we all felt her leave. And she and her welcoming team left, and we knew they had gone to be with my two brothers who were not in the room with us. And sure enough, when we called them moments later, they knew she had passed because they felt her in the space with them. So all of us had a little bit of what is now being called a shared death experience. And I had a fullness of that experience. And I think because of all your work in helping me understand and equate birth and death, and all of the work I had done taking down the beliefs and the thoughts that got in the way and created fear around death. It's a messy process, yes. It's challenging, so is birth. But at the moment of her passing, there was so much majesty. There was so much grace in the room. And the only other time I had ever experienced that was in the delivery room when my children were born.
That's lovely. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to share how grateful I am for the power of the simplicity of your poems and your work, and how grateful I am. Long before Brene Brown talked about vulnerability as a strength, you were you were writing your story, even in the face of dogma that would try to shame you and keep you silent. And so I thank you with all my heart for that.
Well, I thank you for thanking me.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with our communities before we complete?
I'm just looking at one more of my poems that I like a lot. Let me just end with this.
Yes.
Optical illusion. Time is a stage magician pulling sleight of hand tricks to make you think things go. There, eclipsed by the quick scarf, a lifetime of loves. Zip, the child is man. Zip, the friend in your arms is earth. Zip, the green tree is gold, is white, is smoking ash, is gone. Zip, time's trick goes on. All things loved, now you see them, now you don't. Oh, this world has more of coming and of going than I can bear. I guess it's eternity I want, where all things are and always will be, where I can hold my loves a little looser, where finally we realize time is the only thing that really dies. Oh,
Thank you
many
so
blessings
much.
to you, many blessings to everybody listening. We are all on this same path, helping each other through the births, and they are many, through the deaths, and they are many too.
Yes.
Thank you for doing your part.
And thank you for being far enough ahead of me on the path, and always with your words being that hand up.
Thank you.
I love you so much.
Oh, I love you too. Thank you. Many blessings to your work.